Hey guys, welcome back to another Ncurses tutorial. Today's tutorial is going to be number 6 in my Making Snake and Ncurses tutorial series. Today we're going to be building the Apple class, which is going to be a little character A that when the snake eats it, gets 100 points or something like that. It's going to appear at a random empty location on the board whenever you create it. We're also going to create another class called Empty, which is very simple. It's just going to be a class that's going to be helpful for us when we need to place an empty spot in the grid for whatever reason. So yeah, without further ado, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those down below. If you want to see these videos right as they come out, consider subscribing and turn on all notifications. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps out and keeps me motivated to make these videos. So yeah, let's get started. As always, if you haven't seen the previous tutorials, I recommend checking those out first. Otherwise, what I'm explaining here probably won't make any sense. I'll put a little card up above to the tutorial playlist, series playlist. Oh, Java, leave me alone. Also, in the previous tutorial, I'll put a little card up above to it. We basically created the drawable class, which I don't have open here, but drawable class just helps us to abstract away some concepts that all drawable things will have, such as a y value, an x value, and a representation on the screen. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building the Apple class, and it's going to be extending the drawable class because our apple is something we want to be able to draw on the screen. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to implement the constructor for Apple. Now, because we're extending drawable, this is actually very simple. All we need to do is build a constructor. So we'll create a constructor and we'll have it pass a y value and an x value. So we're basically telling the Apple what its y and x value are. So what we can do is we can say this y equals y and this x equals x. And then finally, we're going to tell the Apple what its representation on the screen is, which is A. So what this constructor will do is the user will pass a y and an x, and it'll set the apple's y and x, and it'll set its icon to A, no matter what. So that's how simple it is to make our constructor. We're all set. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create this empty class here. Now what this empty class is helpful for is it's going to be helpful if we want to place a blank on the screen, essentially. So this is going to be a very simple constructor as well. It's going to take an x and a y, or sorry, a y and an x, I guess, if we want to get the order right. And it's just going to set the y equal to y, the x equal to x, and the icon will set equal to just blank. So I know this is the default anyways for the drawable class, is to make it a blank icon, but this is just explicitly having an empty class that you can pass a y and x value that becomes empty. Now why is it giving me squigglies? Expected oh, I forgot the equal sign there. My bad. There we go. Anyways, so that's our empty constructor all completed. Now our apple is done, but we have to actually include some logic to show the apple on the screen. And the way I want the apple to appear on the screen is I want it to pick a random empty location on the board and just find or place itself there. So instead of having the apple decide what its location is, we're going to have the controller class, the snake game class, decide where to place the apple, because the controller should really decide what the models do. It should change the state of the models, and then it should pass that changed state to the view, which is our board class. So our snake is going to be responsible for picking the location. Or sorry, snake game is going to be responsible for picking the location. Now, in order to get a random number and get a random location, we're going to have to include a couple libraries as well as set a random seed. So the libraries we're going to use are the time library and the std library, or sorry, std lib library. I'm using a very antiquated way to get random numbers just because the randomness of this doesn't actually matter that much. Realistically, standard lib.h, people's lives don't rely on this randomness, so it's okay if it's kind of a pseudo-random number, which is what we're getting here. So time.h and stdlib.h are important for that. What we're going to use is from the standard lib library, we're going to use srand, which seeds our random number generator, and we're going to pass it time null, like that. This is where we need the time variable. Oop, that needs to be capitalized. Oops. We need to capitalize null there. So we need time from time library, and we need srand from standard lib. srand allows us to use the function rand, which will give us a random number between 0 and 1, and then, or sorry, between 0 and max number, and we can work with that to get a random number that we like. So that's just an important thing we have to do. I initialize it here because we're only going to initialize one snake game, so that way we'll only seed our randomness one time probably. So the next step is not to create the apple yet, because despite the fact that we have a random number available, we can't just pick any random number because we need to know an empty space on the board. So how do we get an empty space on the board? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have our board, we're going to create a method called getEmptyCoordinates, and what this is going to do is, because the board is the view and it knows about the view, it's going to give us information about the view, and it's going to tell us the first empty coordinate it finds. So it's going to pick a random empty coordinate, return it back to us so that we can use that in our snake game. So we're delegating that responsibility to the view because it's related to what's visible on the screen. We're trying to find an empty space. Now, in order to make this class, or sorry, this method, we need to keep actually keep a couple variables that we already passed into the class earlier, which are the height and the width. So we'll create a couple member variables here, height and width. And then in the constructor, when we get the height and width variables here, we'll just save those. So we'll get this height, this width, and we'll set the height and width like that. Now we can actually create our getEmptyCoordinates function. So what we'll do is we'll have it'll return void, and I'll explain why in a second. So it's going to return void. It's called getEmptyCoordinates, and then we're going to have it pass two variables, but they're going to be variable references. So that way the value of the variable will be returned if it's changed within the function or the method. So this is essentially going to be our return variables here, are the y and the x. So we're going to get an empty y and x from this function. Alright, so to build our getEmptyCoordinates method, what we're going to do is we're going to create a one-line while loop, which is going to look really confusing, but I'm going to explain the whole thing and it'll hopefully make sense. So we're going to create a while loop, and it's going to have a semicolon at the end like that because it's just a one-line while loop. And by one line, I mean there's nothing inside the loop. It's literally just while and then a case. And we're going to use a function called moveWinChar, or INCH, which is in char. And what this function does is we pass it a window, so board win, and then we pass it a y and an x. I'm going to change those in a sec. And what this will do is it'll tell us whatever character, this function will return whatever character is at position y and x within this window. Now, what we're actually going to pass for y and x, we're going to pass two random numbers, and we're going to check to see if those two random numbers are an empty character within the window. Now, we can't just pick any random numbers. We want to pick random numbers that are within the height and the width of the board win. So that's why we saved our height and width variable earlier, so that we could get a random number between our height and width for the y and x. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to get a random number, so random number, the rand function, which we seeded earlier with srand. We want to get a random number, and we want it to be between 0 and height. So what this basically is saying is we're going to get a random number between 0 and whatever the height is, and that'll give us a random y value that's within the range. We're going to do the same thing for the x. So we'll do rand, but we'll do with width instead. So this will give us a random number between 0 and width. Now finally, to make this all a big one-liner, we're going to set y equal to rand height. So what this will do is it'll set y equal to this, and it'll pass whatever y is to the function. Same thing here, we're going to set x equal to that. Oops. So what this is going to do is it's going to loop, actually, sorry, one more step. So now that we've got the variable, or got the character from the screen, we're going to ask if it's equal to a blank character like that. So what this function is going to do is it's going to loop until we find a blank character at some random y and x value. And when we're done, it'll have saved the y and x value, and it'll get returned to the user. So that's a fun little one-liner. I think it looks really cool and concise and neat, but it's obviously very hard to read. But this is going to do the job. This is what we need it to do. So now we can jump back to our snake game, And what we want to do is we want to get some empty coordinates. So we want to find the first empty coordinates. So we'll say board.get empty coordinates, and we'll pass it our y and x variables. What this will do is once get empty coordinates is done running, y and x will contain the first set of random empty coordinates we found. And now that we've got some empty coordinates, we can display our apple on the board. So board.add apple, and then we'll give it our y and x, and we don't have to pass an icon because apple picks its own icon. So, oh, I did forget we have to include the apple class. So include apple.hpp. So now, is it still giving me an error? Apple declared at line blah 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 is inaccessible. Oh, I know what happened. I have to make this public. That's my bad. Now, if we go back here, that error has gone away. And if we make and run my program here, alright, so I screwed up a bit here. So just a tiny little mistake here. So within the while loop, we're checking to see when this character, or we want this to run while our character is empty, but that's not true. What we actually want is we want this to break out of the loop as soon as it finds an empty space. So we want this to run while it's not equal to empty. Because once it finds an empty space, that's when we want it to stop. So we want a not equals there. So then if we make and run the code, oh, I didn't save it. That's my bad. Save. Quit, make and run. Now you'll see it picks a random empty location within the board, and it won't pick one on the outside like it was before. Alright, so now that we're displaying the apple, the next logical step is every time we create a new apple, we want to get rid of the old apple. Because right now, every time you create a new one, the old one still sticks around and it doesn't disappear. So that's where our empty class is going to come in. So every time we create a new apple, we want to place an empty over the last apple. So we can do this by storing our apple. So we'll add a member variable. We'll create a pointer to apple like that. And what we can do is when we create our apple, we'll set our apple like this equal to new apple yx, and we'll pass that in here instead. So we can pass star apple like that. And the reason why we pass star is because board accepts an apple class, not an apple pointer. So, or sorry, an apple object, not an apple pointer. So now that we're storing this apple for later, what we can do is if we can run a little check, we'll say if apple is not equal to null, oops, not equal to null like that, we can say board.add an empty at apple.get y, apple.get x, like that. So essentially what this line of code is saying is if we already have an apple, so if apple is not equal to null, we want to add an empty spot to an empty spot at apple, the old apple's y and x value. The problem we're having right here is that I didn't include empty up here. So include empty.hpp, like that. Alright, so now that that is all done, let's try to make and run this. Apple get x, apple get y. Oh, sorry, this is a pointer. That's why we're getting that. So we gotta use the pointer operator like that. And now if we make and run, you'll see we get a, and then the last day disappeared, and the new one, when the new one appeared, again the last day disappeared, and the new one appeared, so on and so forth. So now it's working just the way we expect it to. The only other thing we should do, I'm not like the best at like cleaning memory and writing perfect code, but technically we should write a destructor for the snake-in class, which deletes or deletes the apple class. So I'm just going to do a quick jump cut to after I've written that and show you guys that. So be right back. All right, there's our destructor. So this essentially is just a good housekeeping thing to do. Anytime you create a pointer to a variable, you should destroy the variable at when you, depending on the scope, you should just make sure you delete things if you're using dynamic memory. So let's make and run this. Just make sure it still runs. Yep, everything runs just fine, and when we close out, we don't get any errors. So yeah, I hope you guys like this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to start making the actual snake. So that's pretty exciting. I know we're finally getting there to the point where we're actually writing the game now. So I hope you guys like this. Again, if you did, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, turning on all notifications. And if you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. I hope you guys like it, and see you guys in the next one.